Welcome to our small group format. So I think that it's important to think about, why do small groups matter? Why? Small groups offer an opportunity for people to just do life together and invite others to join them. We worship only 1 hour a week, and that is not enough time to grow in your faith or in relationships with each other. So that, just passing the peace and saying good morning quickly, and even if you stand around and chat or stay in the coffee time for a while when we're meeting in person, is just not enough. And especially for those churches that are meeting virtually, or who will be meeting virtually because they're going to switch from outside to and they're not switching inside, or those that can't get all their people back into the building again together. Relationships matter, and therefore we need to provide opportunities for connection. Small groups develop meaningful relationships with God, each other, and the world. And I'll explain all of those elements as we go through. And then small groups create connections in your congregation that will support you throughout the winter. So we don't know what this winter will bring. We don't know, if we will remain in phase three kinds of things, if we'll end up going back to phase two. But I think the one thing we recognized through this is that we are people, and we need each other. We need our relationships, and so having a way that you can connect and care for people is essential, and small groups will do that. Small groups give space and time for the Holy Spirit. You know, I think that, when we have worship, it is good, and we have super meaningful moments, especially Holy Communion is one of those times. Their prayer time is some of that, but a lot of it, especially when you are on virtual um, presentations, it isn't a space for people to respond. It isn't a space for people to dig in themselves. Small groups give people time to dive into the Bible themselves, and also it creates space for prayer. Um, you want to make sure that your small group host or facilitators are mindful of the why of small groups. That often when we think about Bible studies, and that's why we don't use the word Bible studies, we're using the word small group, is because Bible studies is an information gathering activity. It's about gaining knowledge or finishing a book, whereas small group is the opportunity for people to really explore, the Bible for themselves. It's like looking at a scripture and pulling out a word and talking about it, and them being able to know that the Holy Spirit will help them discern the scriptures for themselves. And so it gives time for the Holy Spirit to work on people's hearts. Small groups are a place to meet people where they are. So while often, especially during Advent and Lent, we pick studies for an entire congregation, not everyone in your congregation is in the exact same space. So not everyone has the time. And I would say in this season, especially when you have parents that are really multitasking between, doing their jobs, but also doing, a lot of the schoolwork with their children, they are likely not to have the time to read a book. So you want to offer something for people who aren't going to prepare in advance. So you might use the same curriculum, but use it in a different way. So how do you meet the people in your congregation exactly where they are? Christina talked about the fact that she's going to do a daytime study. Even daytime studies are especially important if you are meeting in person, There are people who don't like to drive at night. There are people who have other obligations at night. But also, even when we are just doing it virtually, creating a variety of time spaces is really important to make sure that you offer something for all the people in your congregation. So you're meeting people where they are as far as their schedules, where they are as far as their comfort level, where they are as far as their interest and expectations. Small groups have a few key components. One of the components is that people are rooted in prayer. That make sure that you create time and space and that it is a priority that people have time to pray, because prayer is where partnership begins. Prayer is when people really begin to reveal who they are. So you need to leave space for time. The second is that they meet regularly. One of the greatest obstacles for small groups is the fact that you come on and not only one other person comes on, and as a leader you're like, oh, am I going to just do this for one person, and then you don't do it, and then you start becoming inconsistent. I said when Christina was the only person on the call this morning, I said, we're going to do this, we're going to record it, and then we will send it out if needed, but we're going to just do it. So when you make a commitment for small groups, make sure that you say, we're going to do it these 4 weeks at this time, no matter what. Even if I get on and I'm the only person on there, I'm committed to wait at least, a half hour, whatever you choose as a church. But, you need to meet regularly. And then it has to help people to grow in their faith. It has to have a spiritual component, and it has to have engagement in the world. So while most of these books and the studies that we're going to talk about today, of course, include growing in faith and spirituality, we want to make sure that all of it has an action component. So how do you take your personal faith and make it a part of the community? But sometimes people with other small groups, so knitting groups and art groups and cooking groups and fellowship groups, they can all continue through Advent with just a little bit of help. So what does it look like to add a devotional to a dinner group? An Advent-based devotional to a dinner group or your knitting group. So it gives a place for people to grow in faith. So today we're going to, talk, a good story is, who, what, when, where, how. Well, we're going to do the who, what, when, where, how today, talking about Advent. So we're going to talk first about who. Who do we invite to this small group? Who will lead in this small group? First of all, the who lead. What you need to think about is, do you have regular small groups going on now? Who has a regular small group going on? Any small group classes going on now? Raise your hand. Okay, so 2. So one of the things is, often as a church, especially for Advent and Lent, we stop everything and we kind of put on top of all of our ministry these small groups for Advent classes, Lenten classes. But what does it look like? Will you move your regular classes into doing Advent things, or specifically the thing that the whole church is doing? Or will you just let them continue? So that's an important thought, is will your regular classes move to Advent? The second is, Advent is a wonderful time to empower new leadership. First of all, it's 4 to 5 weeks, so it's a short commitment. It's something that maybe people would have taken on doing on their own. They've likely been a part of an Advent study before, And these pre-done Advent studies are kind of, everything in a box kind of idea. So it gives you the opportunity to be fairly simple. So how can you empower new leadership through Advent, and then have the opportunity to, use these people throughout the year as your small group leaders? Pastors. We have a couple pastors on this call. This is really important. What I say in every one of my small group workshops is small groups are to be laity led and pastor supported. Laity led and pastor supported. So why do we say that? Because this is a place where our lay persons can really expand our small group ministry, because there's a lot of them and they already have connections with people. So if we allow them to give them the pass the baton to them on small groups, that is just a wonderful opportunity for us. Laity led, pastor supported. And the piece that we want to make sure is that if you are a pastor and you choose to lead, so some pastors will say, my church is too small, or it is the expectation of my church that I lead. Make sure you have a lay person as a partner and let them at least co-lead a good portion of the class. This way, it shows your people that you are saying, look how well this person can do this. So I know that goes, I, as a local church pastor, I love small groups. They're a great opportunity for me to connect with my people. I love the curriculum of small groups, all those pieces of it. But what I learned in this job is laypersons said to me, you know what? Often we feel like we're in competition with our pastor, because if the pastor chooses to lead the small group, everyone wants to sign up for that. And then nobody wants to sign up for mine. And so we kind of discourage people. The second thing is we are in an itinerant system, which means that we will at some point leave our congregations. And if you have a really good, strong group, small group ministry, that will keep the ties of your church together so well that it won't be broken up by any disruption in leadership. So who will lead? Who will participate? Oh, wait. Make sure that if you do have one more thing, if you do have new people coming on, have them share the facilitating. So share across, hospitality or encouragement, or one person does technology, whatever it is, but invite them to go into partnership with someone. Again, this is how you grow leadership, because at some point, then they might be able to split up, and instead of just having one group, now you can have two groups, and that can support each other. The one thing that I've often been telling people is, if you can start with 3 people, one person whose gift is encouragement, one person whose gift is hospitality, or in this season of virtual piece, it might be technology, and then one person whose gift is prayer. If you get those 3 people and you ask them to co-host a group together, and then ask them to each invite one other person, which it's easy to invite one other person instead of 6 other people, now you have a small group. And so it's a very easy way to begin small groups in your church. You have 3 people and they each invite one person, and you have a group of 6. So it goes to how will you invite? That's one way you can invite. I would say for Advent, especially if you, with social distancing, and if you're going to do it virtual, to do 6 to 10 people in your small groups. I know often we do much bigger groups. It's if you're going to do a bigger group online, you need to make sure that you have the technology to do breakout rooms. And each breakout room has to have somebody who's going to co-host the leading of the group. So I heard David say that was one of the questions. In person, I generally say 12 is like the max for in person, even without COVID. But I think doing 12 people in a room right now is probably, you're going to be so far apart, you're going to lose some of the intimacy that you, so I would say 6 to 10. And then I want you, when you think about, how will you invite, who will participate? Do you have groups that make space for new people? Do you have groups that make space for new people? So often we have groups that have met together for years, and then we're like, oh, well, they can just do curriculum, and this curriculum, and if anyone wants to take part in it, they can just join that group. But what it does is it kind of breaks down some of the relationships that have been built in that group, the confidentiality, the stories that they've been sharing, and it's not ideal. So we should always have a space for new people to connect with other new people. The second is, do you have a space that people can invite their friends? So something that's less intimidating, something that can be, an evangelical thing. Especially with virtual groups, people will invite, their sister who lives, in Ohio or something like that. So it gives an opportunity for you to expand your small group ministry if you make sure that you have space to invite friends. And then how will you invite? There's a difference between invitation and promotion. Invitation is personal. It means somebody calls you up on the phone, somebody writes you a note, and somebody walks up to you in person and says, I'd like you to join my small group. A personal invitation is really the best way to get people to join small groups. I think that COVID will teach us, hopefully, this lesson that yes, it's great for information or promotion to stand up and say that from the pulpit we're having small groups. It might be fine to promote the theme and use social media or newsletters or emails, but please do not mistake that for an invitation. When we ask people across the board what got them to start being a part of a small group is someone personally invited them. And if they're going to invite them and it's an in-person thing, and it's someone who's not familiar with the church, it has to include great hospitality. So great hospitality means you invite the person, and then if you're going to meet in person, you say, I'll meet you in the parking lot and we'll walk in together. There's nothing harder than walking into a space that you're not familiar with. Especially if you are doing a church that does house meetings. So this might not have happened this season, but if it happens in another season, nobody wants to go to a stranger's house unaccompanied. So there has to be that hospitality. If it's online, what you want to do is have the person call up the person they're inviting right before the thing and say, I'm jumping online. I look forward to seeing you. If you have any problems getting on, give me a call. Because that way you don't feel awkward about getting on. So it needs to be a personal invitation. So next, what will you study? Well, the first thing is, will this study tie Advent into the Advent preaching theme? So sometimes we as churches decide, overall this is our preaching theme, and so therefore we're going to tie all of our studies, everything is going to go together. Will the theme go through all the ministries of the church as well as children and youth? And are there other things that it will include, like a book or devotions or media? If it is one of those, if it's going to be tied with a preaching theme, and you're going to preach something unique, well, then you might have to write your small group study. the ones that we're going to talk about today, some of them have preaching resources to them, some of them don't. You know, you might, as a pastor, might have to read the book and write your sermons based on the book. Is the book deep enough to actually do that? I have to say, some Advent studies, there's just not enough information for me to come up with the unique theme for my sermon, as well as the small group have information that they can talk about that's unique. So the what is, pretty simple here. So I am going to share with you, I've picked out a couple studies. They're available on Cokesbury, but they're also available in other places, Christian Book, Amazon, etc. And we're going to kind of go over these studies to kind of just highlight them. So, like some of you have talked about already, Incarnation, Adam Hamilton's book. So each year, the author and Pastor Adam Hamilton writes an Advent study. Has anybody done his Advent studies before? Anyone?
I led his most recent one, The Walk. I led that one last October.
Okay.
So I'm familiar with the format.
Okay, so he has a good format. He does a nice short video that really ties all the information together. He has like a formula, and if you do an Adam Hamilton, you know what to expect. And so he writes this for his congregation, and then he provides it for publicly. He wants to help his congregation and others explore this year why Jesus came. That's kind of his what he started out with. So it's called Incarnation: Rediscovering the Significance of Christmas. And so in it, you'll examine the names of Christ used by the gospel writers. So you'll look at the historical and the personal significance of Jesus's birth. And then he does 5 studies: Jesus as Christ as the Messiah and King, Jesus as the Savior, Jesus as the light of the world, Jesus of the Word made flesh, and Jesus as Lord. So this season, he's going to invite people into his living room, which I thought was a great idea, and to remember what is important. So as we face this uncertainty, and while there's so much conflict in our world, he wants Christians to reclaim that the Christ child brings us together, heals our hearts, and calls us into light out of darkness. So that's kind of a little bit of an explanation of Incarnation. The second book, again, a popular author who has done a number of studies, Dr. Ed Robb, and his study is called Making Room: Bringing the Love of God to Neighbors and Strangers, Outcast and Community. So he says that if we look at the Advent story, we can quickly learn and see the focus of the coming of the newborn King is not inward, not just for us personally, but outward. So bringing the love of God to neighbors and strangers, outcast and community. So what he does is the book looks at first the innkeeper, and the innkeeper being not like the slam in your face, there's no room in the inn that we often talk about, but that he's a good neighbor. He gives this space to the Holy Family. Second, he looks at Joseph and Mary and how they welcome the stranger when they welcome in the Magi. Next, he looks at God invites the shepherd. God is a God of outcast, and that it is the outcast of their society who are the first ones to see Jesus. So who are the outcasts that Jesus is inviting us to see ourselves, because God sees this year? And finally, Jesus came to call us into community, that there's a sending out, that there is always a sending out with Jesus. And so, how we make room for making sure that we live in community. The next is a study called Almost Christmas. So this is a pretty popular, I think this is their third year. It is a group of United Methodist pastors that get together and they have conversation with each other, table conversation, and they present this study together. It's a Wesleyan Advent experience. Some of the authors are pretty familiar. You might remember Matt Roll. He's done a couple studies that Christmas studies. So they look at John Wesley's famous sermon, Almost Christian. And they say Wesley encouraged people to follow Christ wholeheartedly, that almost is not enough, that you need to give all of yourself. So in Almost Christmas, the authors are explaining how can we make that same wholehearted commitment to Christ during Advent? How do we connect our Wesleyan heritage with the familiar Advent themes? So this gives the hope, joy, faith, hope, joy, peace, and love themes. And how do we incorporate them into our lives through Advent, but then how do we live them beyond the Christmas season? And this, one of the added pieces of this study is it includes prayers for lighting the Advent wreath and hymns that you can add. And so you might add these as elements of your small group. So what does it look like to virtually, if you're not meeting in person, virtually light everyone, make an Advent wreath as an initial activity, and then light the Advent wreath every week when you study together. The next is Light of the World. So Amy Jill Levine, what she does, she is a professor and biblical scholar. And so she looks at the various stories of Matthew, Luke, as well as some ancient texts, including the Old Testament. And they're all around the birth of Jesus. And so this study traces Christmas narrative through various stories. She's a storyteller, and she really wants to make sure that the stories of Christmas are highlighted. And so she looks at the narrative of Zechariah and Elizabeth, Mary and her journey to Bethlehem, the visit from the Magi. Part of this, and this would be great if you have a women's group that wants to do a study, not that I would limit it because I think it's a good study, but it highlights the role of women in the first century in the Jewish culture where they didn't have power. So maybe, the people who in your congregation who are feeling powerless during this season, this will, emphasize that God sees those that the world kind of forces into a corner. It emphasizes the importance of Mary's visitation. It looks at the political piece, the census at the time. It looks at the significance of the stable and the Star of Bethlehem, and it does look at the flight to Egypt. So it looks at those who are immigrants, those who are not in, who are not allowed to feel at home in their country of birth. So I think it has a lot of really good themes that could be very interesting in this season. Maybe it's not for your whole church, but I do think for some groups this would be a great book, and she's very engaging. And lastly, we're going to highlight our G&J breakthrough materials. So this Advent, it's called Deck the Hall, Decorating Your Life with What Matters. Now, when we wrote this Advent study, back in, I think it was maybe last January, might have even been December. So we had no idea about COVID when we wrote this study, but we were talking about the fact that sometimes we get, overwhelmed by all the activity of Christmas and we miss the important parts. What we did was we adapted this study to match our times. So deck the hall as we get out the Christmas lights and the ornaments and the tinsel and decorate our homes this year. It might be hard for some to feel holiday cheer. We have truly been through a lot this season. And so how can we prepare our hearts and our minds for the arrival of Jesus so that we can truly celebrate? And can we do that by decorating our lives with what matters? And again, looking at the four themes of hope, peace, joy, love of God. The Advent study is a partner to the preaching series that we have, Deck the Halls, as well as we have worship materials, we have slides, we have videos. So it's a complete package because it's from G&J. It is, of course, free and it's posted on our website. Not all the materials are there yet. I don't think the videos are there yet, but everything else is now in its space. And but it is also, you can use Breakthrough as a standalone so that you don't have to be preaching the series to be able to use this as part of your small group. The one thing that we are very careful with Breakthrough is the fact that we use the exact format, the same format for no matter what lesson we're doing. So that if you prepare small group leaders, what you as a leader or a pastor can do is you can get your small group leaders together. You could get them together on Zoom. You could go over this one time with them, and then they would be prepared to do this for 4 weeks, 5 weeks with their congregation. This, we really work hard that people have the opportunity to really delve into the scriptures themselves with this study. So every Breakthrough small group has the same formula to it. It has an opening prayer. We write out the opening prayer because we know every person is not, you adapt it to your needs, but not every person is comfortable praying out loud. We connected a hymn with every one of them so that you could play maybe a little Christmas or Advent music with it. There's a breaking the ice question. So there's kind of a fun question for people to get started in the conversation. When we wrote Breakthrough, we wrote it so that it could be used with dinner church or dinner groups. I don't know if they're going to be happening this Advent, but you know that for further things, this works great. So what you would do is do the opening prayer, maybe play the music. The breaking the ice would be while you're getting your food and having, you know, just that big beginning conversation. As the meal begins to wind down, then you would get to the wrestling of the word. The wrestling of the word, people really delve into the scripture themselves. Well, the group leader is not expected to read a lot of commentary. They're not expected to be a biblical scholar. What we want people to do is to read these questions and then look at the text and what is the text saying and pull this out for themselves. I have, in doing small group training, I've done these studies a number of times over COVID, and we've actively done it so that people could practice. And I just love the questions that people come out of this text with. They are just amazing to me. So we will have a study in which we will train specifically on Breakthrough, but that's what the wrestling of the word does. Next step is, how do I apply this to my life? So while we give challenges in our congregation, so how do we apply things as a congregation? This really is to, you know, how do we personally apply it? And, you know, what does this passage offer you hope today? This is where we get to know each other. And I think that's great. And then each one has a closing prayer to it. So each one has the exact same format to it. When? So I've kind of, you know, set up a timeline. And if you like, I will email anybody this timeline so you don't have to worry about taking notes. So the first thing is, you know, begin now, pray and read. Look over these materials. The first, though, but before we look at anything, is to slow down. I feel like even though we're in COVID and we might be stuck in one place, I feel like we're like those little hamsters running around in a circle on that wheel. I feel like we're working harder than ever before, but we're not moving very far. And so just slow down, take some deep breaths, pray, and read. And read, some of those Advent scriptures. Look at the lectionary, whatever. But do that now. And what is speaking to you? What do you feel is important for your congregation to hear now? Just clear out some of the noise. It is a very noisy time in our lives. So clear out all of those things. Maybe just give yourself one day that it's just all about Advent. I know that seems ridiculous. Saying it out loud as a local church pastor, it seems crazy to me. I'm like, do you understand all the things I have to do? But I did set next week, the deacon that I work with, she's going to preach, and I'm going to make sure that I give the time to Advent so I can hear what God has to say about Advent. The second thing which is a now thing, is invite others into the process. So invite others into praying, into reading, and then eventually brainstorming and planning. So depending on how you're going to approach this, it might be the worship team, it might be small group leaders, it might be children and youth leaders. So if you're going to involve the whole church in your plan, you want all of these people so that they can brainstorm through it. So I've already connected with my children's leader to say, okay, how do we think we can work together for the Advent theme this year? And the musicians might be another one that I didn't add there. And then look over the studies and pray about what does your community need to hear this year. And then another thing is, but what has been popular in your community in the past? So sometimes, you'll get people because it's what they always do. So that might be the direction that you go. But also, do need to move away from that and think of a fresh approach. I'm not sure. That's the place that I'm torn is, do we do something new this year, or do we stick to what has worked in the past because people need some routine or familiarity? So I think you need to think about that for yourself. And then in early October, think about choosing leaders for your small group to be the small group host. And again, like I said, it's someone that you can, pick 3 people. They each invite 3 people, and that works out really well. Choose your curriculum. I think the mistake that we often do is become very curriculum driven. I ran Sunday school for years, and I know exactly how that can be, is you just start with the curriculum. Well, I'd like us to kind of think backwards, is start with the praying and the what do we need to hear, and then move to what curriculum fits it, because there's so much curriculum out there. You'll find something that meets your needs, but choose the curriculum and then determine your needs. What do you need to purchase? What do you need to print? What do you need to write? Even though things are, supposedly pre-done, they might not be done enough for your layperson to lead it comfortably. Do you need to have a webinar or a seminar to just go over the first lesson with all your leaders so that they're kind of comfortable with what's going on, that they know how to do things to do this class if they're going to do it virtually? In mid-October, you want to invite. Again, you will do some promotion, but you want people to begin to invite. And then when they invite, they need to have certain information. What are they going to learn? How long is the class? How and when is the class going to be presented? Because there's, you don't want to say, would you like to be a part of my small group and not have that information in front of you? So what are you going to be learning? When? How is it going to be presented? In early November, let people know that about the studies through social media, email, so you can get additional people. But remember, nothing replaces that personal invitation. And then again in early November, set up the time to go over this study with your leaders. And then late November, you're going to start the groups. And you're like, late November? When does Advent start? I feel like we always shortchange Advent because people get really busy that last week. And so we get a drop off. So what does it look like if your Advent study actually starts the week before Thanksgiving? Not that exact week of Thanksgiving, but the week before Thanksgiving. And then you can give some space for people to take the week off for Thanksgiving. And then, so if you were going to do the Advent wreath one, maybe you'd start the second week in November and make your Advent wreaths together. And then you would the next week do the first lesson, take off Thanksgiving weekend if it works. Some groups, people aren't going to go anywhere this year maybe. So maybe they'll still meet. But, start a little earlier. And then the other thing is, and this is super important, one of the most important things I'm going to say this whole day is make sure you have one meeting planned for January. You want people to come back one more time into the new year, because then that's when you invite them to the next group that's happening, and you can continue on, and that group won't be just a one and done group, but it will continue. So make sure that you have one group that meets in January, even if they're just going to have a meal together, if that's permissible, or they're just going to spend time together. We generally have a lesson on breakthrough that's a single lesson for Epiphany. You could do that, but make sure you meet in January. And then do your groups, November through January. And then after the groups are finished, evaluate. That's the other piece that we often forget. Yes, David.
So Gina, you were saying maybe invite or have the group meet one more time in January. Would you suggest maybe the week after New Year's?
Yes.
Because, yeah. Okay, so the second week in January.
Correct. So okay. After the holidays, kids get back to school, hopefully, whatever it might look like. This year, again, it might look different, but they should meet in January, because then that'll be the last class for that. You might take off 1 week to do evaluations, and then the following week, invite them to join your next group, which is going to be about, and then you'll have to plan that. So you should never have someone leave a small group without an invitation to the next small group, and it's a specific invitation. Like, we're going to now study, this, and you show the book, okay? And actually, if you get stuck, I am doing a district-wide study, and it's called Graceful Life, and this is a great book. It's a United Methodist book, and it's on the means of grace. So if you're stuck and you're like, I don't know what to do, and I don't want to use the Breakthrough series, find that book, because it's great. That's just an added bonus for today. I'll give you that. So evaluate. Make sure you take time to evaluate what went well, hear your leaders' experiences, and then you can use those notes specifically for planning your Lenten series. So we needed more time, whatever they need, what went well, what were their challenges. And if you wanted someone from the small group team to meet with your church leaders for either preparation or for evaluation, we could set that up. At this point, there are different options for where small groups meet. You can do them virtually, so Zoom, Google Teams, Facebook Live, but Facebook Live limits your interaction. You can set up, if it's a really small group, you can set it up in a private Facebook group, and they can chat together. Or depending on the circumstances in November, you can meet in person based on your local church's plan. No matter where you meet this season, more than ever, people are looking for connections. So make sure that you create connections.